Welcome back to another episode of A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci. I'm excited to launch another episode for you all. I'm Vincent Lanci, speaker, coach, and author of the book Left for Dead, A Story of Redemption. When I was 21 years old, I was the victim of a hit-and-run accident while walking home from a friend's birthday. After coming out of a coma and suffering from a traumatic brain injury, or you may know of as a TBI, I soon realized that it was time to put my mental health on a very high pedestal. This transformative experience has led me to create a podcast that is all things mental health. If you enjoyed today's episode, please continue listening by subscribing and rate the show 5 stars. Would it benefit you to hear from mental health professionals and influencers? Would it also add value to your life to hear mental health advocates share their stories and talk about their mental health, the disparities they face, and how they actively combat them? If you answered yes to any of those questions, you came to the right place. I want to start by congratulating you for making your mental health a priority. On this episode, I am happy to introduce my guest, Tracey Maxfield. I met Tracey via Instagram as she reached out to me as a potential guest for her podcast that covers many mental health topics. After learning her story, I immediately thought of how much value she could add on this platform too. On August 20th, 2015, after enduring years of intense workplace stress, bullying, and harassment, a hardworking, highly skilled, caring, and compassionate nurse hurtled headfirst down into an abyss of darkness, despair, pain, and sorrow, which she affectionately named the Rabbit Hole. She even wrote a book called Escaping the Rabbit Hole, which is her journey through depression in a brutally honest, raw, and vivid description of what life is like after experiencing an acute depressive episode. She has so much to share, and I'm excited for the value she will add. Allow me to please introduce Tracey Maxfield. Tracey, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh my goodness, my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me, Vincent.
Tracey, would you mind please introducing yourself a little more to our listeners and sharing part of your story before we dive in and get going? Also, please do share your role relating to mental health.
Okay, so I'm a recently retired nurse of 36 years. And originally I was born in Wales in the United Kingdom, experienced quite a lot of dysfunctional family home life. In 1987, after becoming a nurse in the UK, I moved to Canada, where I've actually lived ever since. And so, yes, as you mentioned, I have experienced previous episodes of depression. I was actually diagnosed with a genetic form. And with the help of therapy and medications, usually I would get through it. But in 2011, I started a new nursing position where I, for the very first time, actually encountered workplace bullying. And it was a superior. And it went on right through until 2015. And it was after a pretty horrendous meeting that I had with my bully, where she launched into a nasty personal attack. After the meeting, I went home. I felt just absolutely exhausted and drained and hopeless, and was thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? How can I continue working for her? And promptly fell asleep and woke up the next morning, and unbeknownst to me, I'd fallen down the rabbit hole. I couldn't actually physically get out of bed. I thought I'd had a stroke because of the intense weight of my limbs and the pain. And I kind of muddled through the day. I was practically crawling because I couldn't even stand upright. You know, the darkness, the hopelessness, the crying still didn't clue in. This is depression. It was only on the Saturday evening when I attempted suicide for the first time that I realized I was in deep trouble. And it was on the Monday when I followed up with my physician, and she said to me, girl, your brain is fractured in 1,000 pieces. She said, you've had a massive nervous breakdown or an acute depressive episode. And so began my journey. I likened it to a rabbit hole. It felt that dark and claustrophobic and oppressive and earthy. And whilst I could see the tiniest chink of light in the far, far distance, how I could even get there, how to navigate my way out of this hole that I was in was so overwhelming. I just couldn't think how I could even get out. And the reason why this depression was so different was it was just so intense and overwhelming, but it was also compounded by all the physical symptoms I had as well. And that I had constant suicide ideation. In my book, I have to personalize suicide, and I actually call him DBS, death by suicide, because he never left me. And so my journey took a number of years to escape the rabbit hole. And when I finally did, and the book was published and released, it was through the book that I actually moved on to the role that I'm doing now, and that's primarily talking about bullying, suicide, mental illness in children and teenagers. I had been invited to a middle school, to talk to them, and it was during that time I had I would say, the pleasure, but also it was extremely heartbreaking. I ended up having 63 teenagers confide in me about what they were going through. And it absolutely horrified me that these were 11 to 15-year-olds that basically had been robbed of their childhood. And when I did more research, I realized that in fact it wasn't just an isolated incident in this school, that this was actually a global issue. And it was at that moment I decided, okay, let's change the platform away from me and the book, and let's focus more on, you know what, people, we need to hear what's going on with kids, because as you know, 50% of all mental illnesses show signs and symptoms by age 14, 75% by age 24. So let's start helping them now.
Tracey, thank you for sharing that. On each episode, I share a mental health story of someone who is famous because I want to let you, the listeners, know you are not alone. I want you to understand that even though someone looks like they are healthy from the outside, they may not be on the inside too. For today's episode, I will introduce the mental health related story of Dakota Johnson. For those of you who don't know who Dakota Johnson is, she's an actress who has been in movies such as 50 Shades, The Social Network, and 21 Jump Street. In the article, she shared the ways she coped with depression during this coronavirus pandemic, and she shared how it hasn't been easy, but she's hoping that this write-up can help everybody that is listening on. She feels being in isolation and away from family and friends can cause a consistent feeling of depression and sadness, as she added this quote: "You are at home, you're not with your friends, you're not with your family, you are not able to do the things that make you feel worthwhile. You're kind of in this costume of depression, but not really sure why you feel that way." I wanted to add another powerful quote she shared in, "I've struggled with depression since I was young, since I was 15 or 14. That was then, with the help of professionals, I was like, oh, this is a thing I can fall into? But I've learned to find it beautiful because I feel the world. I guess I have a lot of complexities, but they don't pour out of me. I don't make it anyone else's problem." Tracey, what did you take away from this story or her statements on mental health?
Well, I can certainly relate to that. And I think I like the way that she puts it. Also, this is a thing I can fall into. Yes, I think what I pick up the most from this is, as you said, anyone can have depression. Absolutely anyone. But also, I think she's saying that she doesn't allow it to define her as a person. She acknowledges that it is part of her life, that it will come and go, but she's not so consumed with it that she allows it to rule every other part of her being. And I love that, because that's one of my messages.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of take your mind off of things and not let it dictate your life, but rather you dictate it. Very similar with my injuries. I either thought I could sit and sulk, cry, why me, let this experience define me, or I define it. I turned the dark day into a very bright day because I'm able to share my story and help people through it. So thank you for all that, Tracey. I think it's time for the main event. And on each episode, my guest and I will go over this series of 6 questions, which only slightly varies depending on if my guest is speaking on their own or others' mental health. And since we have a professional and someone who is speaking on their personal experiences, we get the best of both worlds. You ready to go, Tracey?
You betcha.
Great. So many would agree that the more common or talked about types of mental disparities are mood disorders, anxiety disorders, or schizophrenia disorders. Which areas did you come across the most? You can start either personally or professionally.
So I agree with all the ones that you mentioned. Definitely, I find people are more willing to talk about the anxiety disorders because it seems stress and anxiety is more accepted. Whereas mood disorders, especially depression, we know, right, there's still such a huge stigma. In the work that I'm doing, I find that actually more and more people are coming to me about borderline personality disorder and non-suicidal self-injury or self-harm. Now, I know that NSSI is not in itself a mental illness. It's a component because it's an act that people do when they are suffering with some mental health challenge. But certainly I find what I'm finding is that I will encounter many kids especially, and even some adults who are living with a mood disorder or an anxiety disorder and are actually self-harming. It's actually become, I think, the new epidemic, and it's talked about very rarely because I don't think people understand. It's not attention seeking, absolutely not. It is a way that they're trying to express and cope with all the pain and the confusion that they're experiencing.
I couldn't agree more. Now, your personal experiences when you went down what you call the rabbit hole, which of these was most prevalent?
Depression.
Depression? All right, yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, what can I say? It's hell. It's hell. You know that deep down your brain keeps telling you that you should be able to deal with this, that you should be able to move past this and find joy. But you absolutely can't. In my book, I keep likening myself to being encased in cement. It just felt, I was so heavy and weighed down. And at times it almost felt like you were going through, I felt like I was walking down an airplane. You're kind of on automatic pilot. You're very conscious of what's going on in the world, but you don't feel that you're part of the world.
Right. Okay, well, that's a very, very good image to paint. I know that's going to help a lot of people listening on who may have similar feelings. And I have a feeling the next question, the answer may be somewhere around that rabbit hole time period. But when did you first decide that, hey, I'm going to have a career relating to mental health, I'm going to go into the nursing role? But also, when was that moment when you said you're going to start taking a stance on mental health advocacy?
So actually, I've always worked with the brain. I'm a certified dementia practitioner and consultant, and so actually, I've always wanted to be a nurse. Since I was, 2, 3, 4 years old, I always wanted to be a nurse, and I think that was related to the abuse I was dealing with as a child. When I was 18, no one wanted me to be a nurse, and so to prove to them I could do it, I actually started working with patients with dementia.
Okay.
And way back then, so we're talking about the early 1980s, no one even mentioned Alzheimer's. It was considered senile dementia.
Okay.
And it was actually working with so many different older people with dementia. I realized that I actually understood and could relate to them. And so that pivoted me more into brain health. And so I've always kind of done that throughout my nursing career. The actual mental health component, my pivotal
Yeah.
moment was when I was at the school and I had the teenagers come in and opening up to me. My pivotal moment was two specific kids, a 15-year-old girl, absolutely stunningly beautiful, long red hair, who whispered in my ear that she'd come home from hospital after her second suicide attempt.
Okay.
Very profound depression and anxiety, and lifted up her sleeves of her top and showed me all the marks up and down her arm. And then towards the end of the day at the school, I had a 13-year-old boy who was very, very ashamed and embarrassed and very nervous, asked to speak with me privately, and literally fell into my shoulder, sobbing his heart out, and said to me, "I've been in the rabbit hole 7 years. When will I escape?" And he was 13 years old.
Oh, wow.
And so that was I said, all 63 stories were pivotal, but those two I remembered the most because each time my heart broke.
Yeah.
And that really was the defining moment where I thought, this is what I must do.
Well, I love the passion. I love the intensity behind it. You're doing such great work for the mental health community. But since you went through this personally, what advice can you give to our listeners as what may be considered a potential early sign that they may be developing a mental health disparity?
I think the most important thing is to look at what we would call your normal behavior and your normal activities, and there's a change. There's always a change. It's not that you suddenly hear voices or you suddenly feel overwhelmed with sadness. This changes. You'll notice that you may seem more tired than usual, or you're not sleeping as well, or you're sleeping too much. You're exhausted, you feel overwhelmed, your mood changes. You may be a very calm, placid person, and suddenly you're more irritable or easily aggravated. Appetite changes. You may not be concentrating as well, more forgetful. I think those are the key ones that you start noticing a little bit first. And then as you kind of get enmeshed in all of this, then the other more specific symptoms can start showing up where you feel very, hopeless, or you may start seeing things or hearing voices or have this unusual energy that's all of a sudden you're not sleeping at night. That's then with the pinpoint of, okay, something's not happening. Most people usually say, and the same is actually true with dementia because it's the changes in the brain.
Right.
I noticed something was off, something was different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but she or he weren't the same person they were maybe a month ago.
I like the way you put that.
So yeah, I think those are the first early signs. Of course, as you know, with depression, with anxiety, then it starts actually impacting your ability to be in the world. Whether or not it's because of paranoia or intense fear or I can't go out. And with the depression, it's the not wanting to. I don't want to meet with friends and family. I feel no happiness. I feel no joy. You go out for a birthday party, you come home, and all you can think of is either harming yourself or going to sleep forever, or I can't do this anymore.
Well, I think it's a great piggyback right into this next question here of if you could pick three, and I say only three because I want the three most important things our listeners can do on a short-term or daily basis to start improving their overall mental health. They're feeling what you just described. What do you got for us, Tracey?
The three things they can do: talk about it, get that support, try and open up, get a good listening ear, exercise. Even if it's just walk around the neighborhood. I'm not saying go and pump iron in the gym. Exercise. And I always say self-care, but I think it's what I always encourage people to do is see if you can express your emotions either through writing or art or music or journaling. Sometimes that helps you understand and make sense.
Which do you personally do?
All of them. But to be perfectly honest, I think what got me out of the rabbit hole was journaling and exercise.
Yes, I agree 100%. I am very big into making sure I do some kind of exercise a day. Doesn't have to do intense weights, but
No,
just something, core, walking, the little things, because I'm sure you can attest to this. Exercise isn't just for your physical health, it's also for mental health.
100%. And as you know, right, it triggers the endorphins. So you do initially have that rush and that feel good. And what I liked about it was you suddenly realize that yes, you can still feel good about yourself.
Yep.
And you hold on to that because you know it's a possibility.
Yeah, well, Tracey, let's look longer now. Let's delve a little deeper. We spoke about some short-term initiatives that our listeners can take to create a more positive mental headspace. What are two longer-term commitments our listeners can make to create this healthier mindset?
Oh my goodness, long-term commitments is trying to engage and maintain a healthy lifestyle, even when you're feeling worst of the worst. A healthy lifestyle will go a long ways to helping you stay on top of things because, as we know, either you're living with it forever or it'll come and go. And I think that commitment can help you give a sense of purpose and control. And also, that ties in with self care. It's doing things that give you peace and happiness. And I think ultimately, it's knowing that, okay, it's not good right now and it's really weighing me down, but I've got through it before. I can do it again. And I think it just enables you to keep pressing forward. And I think what self-care does is you have to put yourself first. If you allow yourself to be pulled in different directions and give care to everyone else, when you need it the most, what reserves are you going to pull on? There has to be commitment. And I think I've always said this to people, you must want to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is an exhausting commitment because, trust me, you will have good days. And then all of a sudden, when you think you've rounded the corner, you wake up the next morning and you're like, what happened?
Yeah.
Right? Here I go again. And it's very, very difficult because some days you'll take a big step and other days you can just about shuffle your toes. But you've got to keep going and you've got to stop, I think it is, dwelling on the bad and the negative aspects. Stop listening to the voices in your head. We are our own worst enemies. We will berate ourselves and drag ourselves down way more than anybody else will. And try and start thinking of positives.
Yeah,
For
let's
me,
talk about that. Yeah.
right. For me, I think my biggest turning point was expressing gratitude. And my doctor and psychologist had said to me, yes, we agree. You're in darkness, you're in hell, it's hopeless, it's not good. But the more you think about it, the more it just sucks you into that darkness. You have to start expressing the good things that are going on in life. And I actually laughed at them and said, really, what's good? And they said, well, you can walk, you can breathe, you've got food on the table, you have running water. Start thinking of that. And so every time I journaled, they asked me to express gratitude. And it was very difficult at first. And then my defining moment was leaving the house. I stepped outside, winter was coming to an end, the snow was melting. I looked down and there was a purple crocus that had popped through the snow. And I just stared at it and thought, what an amazing color, the intensity. And the sun started shining and I suddenly felt very peaceful and I smiled and there was that light bulb moment. Oh my goodness, gratitude. Life continues, harshness of winter, spring is coming. And that was the moment where I realized gratitude is simple things.
Yes, it came across my way on an early podcast episode where the gratuity journal, writing down what you're grateful for every day. And it really, really does pay major dividends here. But Tracey, let's look into the future. We know how much great things you're involved in between the book and your regular initiatives. What are some ways you plan on continuing to raise mental health? What are some ways you continue to raise awareness for mental health in the future?
Well, as you know, like you, I have a podcast, um, and I have a weekly podcast, and so that is a way of reaching a more global audience. Obviously, the book, the newsletter, I also have an online course, and it's a little bit more difficult now because I don't have the opportunity to travel because we're dealing with the COVID. But I think it's just continually putting it out there, whether or not you do it on a Zoom call, a podcast, a radio show, social media, supporting different agencies like the American Mental Health, like NAMI. It's just, somebody said to me, you're always showing up. And I think that's it. Just like you do, you're always showing up and you're saying something about mental health. And the hope is that there is someone out there that sees or listens to that podcast and has that moment where they realize they're not alone and they can do it.
I love it. Well, Tracey, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know our listeners are going to see all the value in your episode. I love how you just gave an honest testimonial of what you experienced, because that is going to, in turn, help so many people listening on. I loved your tangible advice for both initiatives, but it is time for the last word here, Tracey. And I do this on my other podcast series called What It's Really Like to Be an Entrepreneur, because I want our listeners to really get to know the guests. Is there something that you would like to share with everybody listening on that we did not get to touch on yet today?
I think it's just to all the adults out there, if you have kids, reach out to them, go give them a hug, tell them how important they are, how much you love them, how special they are. Let them know that you're there for them. Sometimes I think kids can feel really alone. And even if you don't have kids, reach out to a friend, a neighbor, especially during this pandemic. People are so isolated. Reach out, check in on someone, know that they're not alone.
Absolutely. I've noticed certain people in my circle, I noticed the differences in their personality as far as we don't speak as much anymore, even on the phone, because their norm may be different. Granted, as an entrepreneur, I've been in this environment isolated for quite some time. So this is normal for me, but it can be difficult, like you said, for other. Tracey, would you please share your social media, website, ways for our listeners to follow your endeavors?
So to get me on any social media, it's Engage, Educate, Empower, which is the name of the podcast. Otherwise, go to my website, www.traceymaxfield.com, and actually you have all the podcast episodes and all the links to connect with me on social media.
Great, absolutely. Tracey, and can you please spell your name for everybody?
TraceyMaxfield.